Hello, my name is Grace, and today I will be presenting my thesis on the motivation of students with and without disabilities for Universal Designs for Learning. To start, Universal Designs for Learning, UDL, is made out of 3 principles and 9 guidelines, which were created to enhance learning outcomes and reduce barriers to education for all learners. The principle of engagement addresses the why of learning by making learning more purposeful as it aims to motivate learners and stimulate their interest. The principle of representation addresses the what of learning. This is done through presenting information and content with various methods. The principle of action and expression addresses the how of learning by providing multiple ways students can express what they know. When comparing traditional education to UDL, we find traditional education provides one method of teaching in a fixed classroom setup, one way of assessment, and accommodations are given to specific students, while UDL offers more flexibility in how courses are taught, the multiple ways students are assessed, and accommodations are given to all students.
Research has found that UDL can increase learning outcomes and academic achievement. In the King-Sears study, there were 5 studies that compared UDL to a control condition while also comparing student disability status. Some studies found an interaction without main effects where UDL conditioned students with disabilities had higher learning outcomes and motivation than students without disabilities. One study showed no interaction but had main effects that demonstrated UDL scored higher than the control condition for improved motor skills. Other benefits include reduced test anxiety when courses provide alternative assessments, and 2 structured interviews found that students with disabilities prefer UDL courses than traditional courses. Traditional teaching method can lead to inaccessible learning, especially for students with disabilities that face barriers in receiving accommodations. And disability services are unable to provide accommodations due to increased need for accommodations and students providing insufficient proof of disability status. A UDL anatomy course found mixed results for student motivation. This study measured motivation with Motivated Strategies for Learning Questionnaire, MSLQ. Medical students had a decrease in intrinsic motivation and task value and an increase in test anxiety, but speech and language therapy students had an increase for control beliefs. Overall, before and after, the student motivation ranged from medium to high. A study looking at innovative classrooms built with the constructivist learning approach has elements of UDL. These classrooms led to increased intrinsic motivation and active learning. When courses provided personal autonomy, it led to increased intrinsic motivation and longer engagement. A dissertation found that when student veterans perceived UDL in their curriculum, it led to higher engagement and interest. Another dissertation looked at first-year community college students who took UDL English and UDL education courses. Results were mixed, but they did find rural and non-traditional students were more motivated in UDL courses. I hypothesized that post-secondary students will rate UDL courses as more motivating than traditional courses. Students with disabilities will rate UDL courses as more motivating than students without disabilities. Motivation for UDL courses will show lower test anxiety for students with disabilities. There were 115 students without disabilities and 43 students with disabilities. Many students with disabilities had formal diagnosis than not. The type of disabilities included 38.8% with psychiatric disabilities, 35.3% with cognitive disabilities, 25% with physical disabilities, and 1.5% preferring not to answer. Age ranged from 18 to 63, with an average age of 21.3 years old. Qualtrics was used because it allowed this study to counterbalance and equally place participants into different conditions based on order of appearance when materials were shown. Mock course outlines were given where students saw 2 ancient history courses, one UDL and one traditional that was either on ancient Greece or ancient Rome. Below, there were 4 possible pairings participants saw: UDL ancient Greece and traditional ancient Rome, UDL ancient Rome and traditional ancient Greece, traditional ancient Greece and UDL ancient Rome, traditional ancient Rome, and UDL ancient Greece. The MSLQ has 6 subscales with a Cronbach alpha ranging from 0.62 to 0.39. The MSLQ was split in half where participants saw both halves by the end of the survey. The first half of the MSLQ included the first half of the questions for each subscale. For example, for task value, I used the first 3 questions, while the second half of the MSLQ included the last half of the questions for each subscale. For example, for task value, I used the last 3 questions. I split the MSLQ since the study had elements of a repeated measure where participants saw UDL and traditional courses. It was a repeated measure because I wanted an equivalent number of students with disabilities for both conditions. After informed consent and demographic questions, Participants received a course outline for ancient Greece or ancient Rome in either UDL or traditional format, followed by one half of the MSLQ. Then the second course outline appeared, which was the opposite of the first outline. This was followed by the other half of the MSLQ. Participants will not see the same course outline or sets of questions twice. With different types of course outlines and order of the MSLQ in mind, there were 8 conditions that controlled which material appeared first and second to the participant. A table demonstrating how these materials were counterbalanced is shown here. Regardless of which of the 8 conditions participants were placed in, participants had 2 average MSLQ scores for each subscale that rated UDL and traditional courses. For example, UDL task value score and a traditional task value score. 6 two-way mixed ANOVAs were conducted. Intrinsic and extrinsic goal orientation showed no significant findings. Task value and control for learning beliefs showed a main effect difference. Self-efficacy for learning performance showed a main effect difference and an interaction. Pairwise comparison showed a significant effect size. Test anxiety showed an interaction. Pairwise comparison did not show a significant effect size, meaning the interaction was marginally significant. For significant subscales, here are the mean scores via bar graph and confidence intervals. Task value has a main effect, as does control beliefs. An interaction and a main effect for self-efficacy, and an interaction for test anxiety are seen here. UDL scored higher than traditional courses for both groups. This was seen in intrinsic goal orientation, task value, control beliefs, and self-efficacy. For UDL courses, students with disabilities scored higher than students without disabilities. This was seen in intrinsic goal orientation, task value, control beliefs, and self-efficacy. The reason why students with disabilities had lower self-efficacy for traditional courses may be because they face barriers in receiving accommodations. Consequently, this has led to a higher chance of incomplete degrees and a harder transition from high school to university. Due to the accessibility of UDL, students with disabilities were more likely to believe that they were capable of completing UDL courses successfully, thus a higher self-efficacy score for UDL. Test anxiety showed mixed results, but it was marginally significant as effect size was not significant in pairwise comparison. Perhaps future studies may find similar results to Owens and Crew's study if the course was real and in person. Limitations include the 8 conditions had slightly uneven distribution of participants and a skewed ratio of disability status groups. In conclusion, universal designs for learning is beneficial in increasing motivation for all students, specifically self-efficacy for students with disabilities. Thank you for listening to my presentation.